Hello, Booktube. As you can see, I have yet another guest. This is David from the Booktube channel, Live Forever or Die Trying. How,
Hello.
how do? Um, and we're here just to chat about whatever, about whatevs. We're going to spend, I imagine, we'll take 30 minutes of your time. I imagine we'll spend most of that time talking about Meghan and Harry.
Oh God, please no.
There's not much to tell. The royal family is now starting to say the only thing they possibly can say.
Is
We're
it too late to
not,
back out?
we're not a bunch of racist dirtbags. What else can they say? Are they supposed to say, yeah, he's got us?
Uh,
But, what's on your mind?
I
Hmm?
don't know, man. Life's pretty crazy, but it's looking optimistic on our side. I mean, as you know, I'm part of a small family business in the
You're
wedding
a wedding
industry.
singer. Is that
Yeah, so
you're a wedding
we
singer?
I'm a wedding singer. And our business was banned by the government, is very justly banned, but nonetheless, we've been regulated out of the market.
And you
So
mentioned in your latest video that the things are looking up.
they are looking up. So in Virginia here, we're down to 1,000 cases per day, which is around when we were in April. We just crossed 10% of the population that's eligible to be vaccinated. I personally got my vaccine, the first dose. My girlfriend is getting her J&J shot today, and things are very quickly turning optimistic, and that is the general air of things. So while we're not expecting to have many weddings in the coming months, the new deposits on the summer and fall events and the events going into 2022 is definitely making sure we can keep the lights on.
Oh, I guess in the wedding business, it would be all about advanced planning, right?
Yes.
You would always be
Mhm.
talking about months and months or even a year later.
Exactly.
And you mentioned in your latest video, in addition to mentioning that things were looking up, you mentioned that because things were looking up, your reading pace was going to decrease.
Yes. So
I
as you
couldn't
know,
help
like,
but chuckle when you said that reading 2 books a week was a freakish number of books. I totally agree, but not in the same way.
well,
But
so I'm coming at that from the perspective of somebody who works between 10 and 12 hours a day, and I'm at least in the office 6 of the 7 days a week. Besides that, I have, of course, my relationship at home. Plus, I live near my grandma and then my parents. So I have family relationships to maintain.
and
And then
hygiene.
the rest of that time is almost exclusively set aside for reading.
And what a list of books you had.
Mhm.
What a list of books. Oh my, I wanted to have an hour-long conversation with you about every one of them.
I got a few hanging out behind us we can reference.
I was fascinated to know that we had the same kind of depreciating reaction to Max Tegmark.
Oh, yeah.
That it's a high reaction that gets a little lower and lower the more you think about it, because I think one of the philosophies of your channel, for those of you who don't know, you should head on over to David's channel and subscribe. I will leave a link, but he concentrates on uh, the wrong term for it would be pop science.
Sure. Yeah.
Because the thing that bothered you about Tegmart's book, I think, was that he was indulging too much in pop science. The
Yes.
one thing you don't do on your channel is underestimate your viewers. And the one thing that really good pop science doesn't do is underestimate the intelligence of its readers. I also really liked that recent video. I'll leave a link to it down below, because not only was it a recent reads video that didn't mention any fiction, but it seemed almost to exist in a world where there is no such thing as fiction. It was just, there's a broad spectrum, yes, but none of it is made up. It was like a little glimpse of paradise.
At least my paradise.
But one of the books on your list that time around was Ageless,
Mhm.
which is right in your strike zone.
Oh
All
yeah, I
about
was very surprised how good it was because, you know, I read about a lot of longevity, biological sciences and whatnot, and just the human aging process. And there's a few kind of gems in the field, but a lot of people writing these books are scientists and researchers first and foremost. And because they are good in the lab, that doesn't mean they're good at explaining their ideas or they can write a compelling story or a history of a field. And Ageless kind of hit that mark like right on the nose where it covered a lot of the science. And again, like you were saying earlier, did not underestimate the reader. It gave you the full biological makeup of what goes into aging. It did not shy away from any of the details, but it did so in a very readable way, which I thought was impressive. I didn't even think you could do it that good based off of the 15 other books that I've read so far in that topic.
And we should stress for new readers that you're not talking here about, primarily, you're not talking about eating right and exercising. When you talk about longevity, you're talking about hacking the body.
Yeah. So mainly medical interventions. I mean, obviously, you know, you got some stuff about how you can eat well and diet well, but I mean, that's something everybody should be doing. When we're talking about like longevity research, we're talking about, you know, like how does the body actually break down? You know, like when our DNA breaks, what happens? How can we prevent that? You know, how do we get rid of Alzheimer's and different diseases such as that?
And generally speaking here, there are two philosophies, right, of looking at the problem. Either the body breaks down, the cells break down naturally due to radiation or wear and tear or whatever, or they're told to break down by some overarching enzyme process that determines ahead of time. That
Exactly. Yeah, and
one of those two things, right? And
yeah,
if it's the second one, that can be hacked.
It could be hacked if it's either, either if it's intended or not, hopefully. So like the thing that would really get us is if we just lack the brain power to fully understand the problem. But apart from that, you know, leveraging AI and whatnot, hopefully we're able to understand these complex systems. But even if we were supposed to die via evolution, so like, let's say there's certain genes that make you more reproductively viable, but in the long term, they hurt you. So just as like a very probably non-scientific example, say there's a gene that makes you run faster. And in the days that we're on the plains of Africa, that means you're a better hunter. You get the esteem of your community because you bring home the most food. You're able to reproduce more because you've earned that respect. Now, that gene that made you run faster, that might mean your cartilage breaks down and you die 10 years earlier. You live with arthritis come your 40s or something like that. And I believe the term for that's pleiotropic genes. And that's what a lot of our genetics are based off of. It's stuff that gets you to reproduction, and then evolution doesn't necessarily care about you after that. Right. So even if we were meant to die, evolved to die, like in that way, we should still be able to reverse engineer it, whether that's with genetic interventions or just repairing the damage as they happen through our genes, whether that's replacing cartilage with stem cells. As per that example, we might not be able to fix the gene, but we can fix the symptom of the gene actioning.
Now that's really the key understanding here, right? Is that natural selection, evolution by means of natural selection, is the passing on of genes. So it's only geared for you to do that. It doesn't, like you say, it doesn't care about the 30 years after that. After that, the 30 years after that, as far as it's concerned, is just slow falling apart.
Oh yeah, it doesn't need us anymore.
Slow falling apart being the title of my memoir at this point.
I love it.
But that could be fixed. I read an article about methylation. Mm-hmm. You're probably an expert in methylation. And a term you mentioned in your video, epigenetics, mm-hmm. where we can intervene in the body to stop it.
Yeah, I took a recent course. One of the books I read, Alex Zoronikov, he wrote a book that I really didn't like, but he ended up putting a course out that was all about deep aging and these different aging clocks. And basically what it does is he takes AI research, or rather computer algorithms, not to fancy up the term. And he says, you know, with this set of biological indicators, whether it's blood factors, nutrition, epigenetics, or whatnot, we should be able to accurately predict within like a 5% accuracy rate this person's age based off of a set of biomarkers. And there's clocks for epigenetics. There's clocks for your cell division. There's clocks for, you know, the age of your skin cells. And it's all fascinating how it's coming together. And you have all these different clocks. The man
who discovered it, right? It's the Horvath clock.
Mm-hmm. Horvath has one. There's also like the Hayflick limit, which is your cell divisions. And they're scary accurate. There's like 40 of them now, and they can predict when you will die without intervention within like 2 years. And that's like, you can do that with a simple like blood panel, and it can pick up your epigenetics with like a DNA test.
That's the impression I got about the Horvath clock. Not so much when you're going to die, but the people who had it, the cell culture that was analyzed, the number that brought back was astonishingly accurate without
Yeah.
this, of course, the culture knowing anything about what your date is on the or your birthday.
Yeah.
So it is an accurate way of determining how these things deteriorate. It's just, I guess the question is, can we stop them from doing that?
Fingers crossed. We've made a lot of progress in a lot of different fields. So David Sinclair, who writes a very popular nonfiction book, Lifespan, he kind of really brought this field a lot of attention when he did his interviews with Joe Rogan and his whole media thing back in, I think, 2018, early 2019. And then what he did is he actually took, stem cells, where he could take cells from your skin, reverse engineer them back to stem cells via what they call Yamanaka factors, just 4 genes that you have to turn on. You make stem cells out of your own skin cells, and they injected these into the optical nerve of a mice or a different mouse, and it actually regrew the complex nerve stem, regaining sight. So like for stem cells and regrowing body parts and cartilage and whatnot, at least that, that part of the puzzle, we're making excellent progress. And the similar story for most aspects of aging, whether it's clearing plaques out of the brain or intracellular junk. And it's very exciting, just kind of all watching it come down the pipeline.
And on your channel, you're mostly trying to steer clear of the politics involved, right?
I
You don't want to rub
don't
it
know
in
if you can.
It's hard to do. When you talk about those procedures, you bring up a million science fiction novels I've read in which these procedures are only available to the wealthy.
Oh yeah, and that's a fact. This book I just actually read from MIT Press is all about the ethics of life extension. And one of the things he specifically mentions in there is the comparison of welfare. And he's like, even if this isn't available, like, don't get me wrong, this is a terribly inequitable system. But even if it's available for only like the top 5% globally, that might be most of our first world countries, but not most of the population, certainly. Then if you add those extra years and you have a very real side effect of harm for the people that don't get them, a death burden, if you would, knowing that somebody else is living longer, that's a real harm. Similar to the way if your neighbor wins the lottery, even though your life hasn't changed, you are still harmed emotionally. And that's just biological. You can't get around that. It's unfortunately very human. But he talks about that in this book, and still he makes the very hard argument that even though this is inequitable, then it's still something that should be gone after in the case that we can't perfectly spread it out. And obviously that's the goal, but in this book here, he's trying to get people on board and say, this will be inequitable, at least at the start, as with every medication. And we hope to, via mass adoption, bring it down. But it's a lot of hard politics about the whole situation.
And economic incentives, I'd imagine, right? I mean, we could have had this conversation 30 years ago about laser surgery for eyes. Turned out, once it exists and once it's fairly affordable to set up, there's an economic incentive to make it available to everybody.
Oh yeah.
So I guess you could have a dock in the box that re-stems your cells. I guess you could somewhere down the line.
Oh yeah, and the economics is very interesting as well, because theoretically, an economy where people live to 1,000 instead of 100, you have more skilled individuals who are able to produce better products with their lifetime of expertise instead of their 40-year career. And so if you are Google and you have opened your Calico company, which is studying anti-aging right now, could that be beneficial for your Silicon Valley entrepreneurs to live longer? Well, it seems like they're hedging their bets, but we shall see. There's clearly certain incentives, both, from a fear of death as well as from an economic and political incentive. And it's important that the good guys get it first and we democratize the whole process, because these companies are working on it right now. And if the general public isn't involved, we're not going to have a say in it. Right. They are. Yeah.
And that was just one of many explosive topics that came up just in that one book haul of yours. You talked about veganism and Jonathan Safran Foer's book, Eating Animals. You talked about extraterrestrials and the Fermi paradox. You talked about Bart Ehrman and the New Testament Gospels. Good Lord.
I guess I like controversy.
A lot of those, one other thing I wanted to bring up is that a lot of those books were acquired through the publisher.
Yeah, so this is the first time I've actually worked with some of the publishers, and I have to thank MIT Press for giving me the first real experience or taste of that. So I got a few through NetGalley as well, which is, I guess, more of a anonymous hands-off approach where you're not actually communicating with somebody. But yeah, I just basically put together an email, sent it over to MIT. I said, hey, here's my numbers. This is the value proposition. I will not sacrifice authenticity, but if you would like to give me this book for an honest review, send it my way. So I ended up getting one of the MIT Essential Knowledge series, ended up genuinely loving it, and then went back for more. They seemed to be happy with it. And then now I've got a small partnership going with them. And that's snowballing into some other presses as well, where there's, I guess I have a little bit of social proof now.
And that was all they didn't need you to have, to ask a dinosaur question for just a minute. They didn't need you to have a print venue. Your YouTube channel was enough.
Yeah, so when I put together the email, I said, here's my stats on YouTube, current subscribers, average, video views, what have you. Because I mean, being in a small business, I understand that they have an expense with this and they need to see the value out of it. So I just kind of put that up front in the email. Also linked my Instagram and then my Goodreads. So it's exclusively online publications. And I say, hey, these are the 3 spots that I'll put the reviews. If this is worth your while, consider me. And I was considered.
And how are you finding NetGalley? Are you enjoying that experience?
No. Well, so the experience itself is fine. I cannot stand digital reading, I found out. So
that was the most controversial thing for me in your entire video. Not religion or veganism or anything like that, but that you slandered my beloved ebooks.
And I don't have anything against the format. I think I have 2 main issues. One's physical. I have a astigmatism. So over the course of a day, the muscles in my eyes will get tired and will slowly blur. I have glasses that alleviate that for when I'm working 10 hours a day on my computer and whatnot. And usually it's a fine time. But after 10 hours of this and then going home and sitting in front of a screen, it's just a little much. And it's not a huge thing, but it will take 10% off my enjoyment.
And that's not bad when you're using your eyes on a printed book?
No, not at all. I think it's because the light's coming directly in my eyes, and I don't know the exact reasoning. Maybe it's subjective, maybe it's placebo, but nonetheless, I have convinced myself that I enjoy it less. And then the second thing is having a book where I can just kind of see my progress instead of a location at the bottom. I mean, I try not to read shorter books just to put down books and write additional reviews and have additional content for YouTube. But I'd lie if I said that wasn't a factor. And seeing the progress on the way through it's a very, I guess, motivating factor for me to go ahead and finish that book, put a few extra pages in. And I don't have that incentive on an ebook because I can't see visually how far I am through it.
But you do have an e-reader.
Yeah, so I've got a Kindle with the I think is the Paperlight or one of the features on it that's supposed to make reading easier. But yeah, so
I have a Kindle. I have a Kindle as well, 2 of them, of the e-ink kind, the one Paperlight that is meant to simulate the reading experience of a book on a page. But unfortunately, I like being connected. I like being able to instantly, if I'm reading something, to instantly say, "Oh, that reminds me of something," and go and find it right there on the same device. And that you can technically do that on an e-reader, but it's so much harder. You have to root around to get a browser.
I will say I love the highlight feature as well as the dictionary feature, because especially a lot of the stuff I read, I encounter a lot of concepts or just, ideas or stuff that I just am not familiar with in the slightest. So having that on hand versus having to go on my cell phone or the computer to look something up is beyond just convenient. But unfortunately, those other 2 factors are currently outweighing it. And I don't know if it's a perfectly logical decision, because I do think that is a huge boon for the format. I just think psychologically, for some reason, I've convinced myself that it's less enjoyable. And
You're
therefore,
not the only one by a long shot.
I do love the form factor too. Throwing it in a backpack is so much more easy. You don't have to worry about bent covers or anything like that. So convenient.
So one of the MIT books you got was that little introduction to alien life, right? To extraterrestrials. So what do you make? If you have to recalculate the Fermi paradox, what's your verdict? Are they out there?
Well,
are we alone?
That's a good question. I think statistically we shouldn't be alone, but there's also an argument brought up in this book that I've never considered before. So you always hear the mathematical thing, like how likely is life to start farming, and what type of planet would it take, how much carbon, how much whatever. And they make that calculation, and they think that, life should be able to evolve and blah, 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 become intelligent. But there's a theory brought up that just kind of struck me. And it's like, humans are a 70,000-year-old species, give or take. And we had dinosaurs on this planet for 2 million plus years, and none of them ever became intelligent. Maybe evolution just doesn't optimize for that. And we're a fluke. We're the one species out of 4.5 billion years.
That maybe intelligence is just counterindicated.
Yeah.
It's enormously expensive biologically. It's enormously time consuming. And if you give that attribute a gigantic forebrain to a species, that makes it's so much energy to do what you would know better than I do. The huge percentage out of 100% of your body's metabolism that is designed solely to support your brain, its energy demands, that's a huge amount. And when evolution is, so to speak, building that, it has no idea that the internet is coming or cars or roads or anything like that.
Oh, there's damn Kindles.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a good long-term genetic investment in the way that brawn does or armor does. And in the way, let's be honest here, in the way that brawn or armor would have been for the dinosaurs, if not for the literal act of God.
Yeah.
They would still be here. It doesn't matter how smart you are if you're the size of Frida. If your neighbors can still stomp you effortlessly, then it doesn't matter. But so is that where you're leaning? If that thought is stuck in your mind, are you thinking that, because you talked about the great filters as well?
Yes. Well, it's between that. It's between that and one of Nick Bostrom's theories. Of course, Nick Bostrom being the philosopher from Oxford, who has the book on superintelligence and a lot of these other really kind of heady futurist theories. But he has this black ball theory, which is like, theoretically, every piece of technology is like rolling the bingo wheel, and you pull out a ball. Sometimes it's strictly good. Like, maybe the wheel is an invention that you can't attribute many bad things to. However, the nuclear bomb is an invention that you can argue has established like worldwide peace right now through mutually assured destruction, but obviously harms tons of people. The power to make it has this runoff that can't be disposed of. It's a gray ball. It's a good and bad technology, and you can argue what percentage is which. But he talks about the possibility that there's a technology that you just create, and upon creating it, you cannot help but destroy yourselves. So in his paper, he talks about the easy nuke. And basically he said, imagine you have a glass panel, you run some electricity through it, and that creates a reaction that is as powerful as a nuke. Anybody can make it with the materials that they have access to right now. It's just once that discovery is made, there will be a chain of events that destroys us. So that's a very valid theory, in my opinion, as well.
A common variant on that is the gray goo, right?
I'm not familiar.
A civilization creates a sort of nanite, all-consuming...
Yeah, that breaks everything down.
Thing, and it is its own rule after that, and it wipes everything out.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, in books that I'm now eager for you to read, I see all these new books, this new thinking, and I want to just funnel them your way to get to run them through that brain of yours. But a lot of those books are saying that social media is that invention. That it's siloing people into a million different worlds of their own facts, with no ability to even communicate, much less agree.
Yeah,
that is the death of the species.
It's scary because social media also feels like it's the next step. Like, we're taking something that humans do, which is communication, and just, we're all inherently tribalistic, but it's just ratcheting it up a degree. And it's just, so like, is part of social media the technology itself that's bad, or is part of that just a flaw of being a human? Like, if given enough time and the ability to communicate like we currently are, is that just a thing that humans are naturally bad at? Like, our long history with racism, slavery, and other very core elements to our history that are just terrible. I mean, I'm not that optimistic about human beings where I can blame social media in and of itself. I don't know if it's polarizing or we are attracted to polarization.
Well,
But yeah, it could turn out that way for sure.
I was reading something by Tristan Harris, who's about your age and who was a design ethicist for Google until he left to found his own company. He said that he has maintained that the algorithms that do this sort of thing are intentionally designed to create those silos.
Mm-hmm.
You have a feed and it starts to exclude everything else, and it starts to attract the things that you like.
Yeah.
So that eventually, as you know, he makes the point that how many people have lost their grandparents to Facebook.
Yeah.
Just a simple way to put it, where you can't talk to them anymore. They don't, for all intents and purposes, they don't inhabit the same reality that you do anymore.
Yeah. And I think that shows how fragile a lot of our realities are right now. Or how poorly balanced, maybe, is a better way of saying that.
Real world consequences. If you can create a silo that tells you that a communicable disease is not real, then you living in that reality can affect me living in mine very much so by what you do. Whole states in the United States that in mid 2020 still had no mask mandates for something that doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. It doesn't care what your fact silo is. It's still going to infect you and your grandparents. That's just astonishing. It makes me wonder how you and your peers are going to fix this world.
Oh God, I don't want that responsibility.
It's going to have to fall on you. My own peers were busy ruining it, and it's left us plumb tuckered out. You were talking about the Fermi paradox and the Drake equation, and whether or not there's a likelihood of intelligent life in any of these Earth-like planets that we're discovering, well over 3,000 by now. And I was thinking, I've been thinking about this for years, thinking that my own opinion, the more I look at it, because scientists say, well, let's do the odds. But we don't know how to calculate the odds. We're the only example. How do you do that? You can say this has so much oxygen, this planet has so much oxygen, so much carbon, but we have no idea what the odds are because we don't know of any other example, even one other example.
We don't have even the first example nailed down because we don't know how we got here. No. We can run cloud chambers with electricity in them and see amino acids forming, but we can't recreate a DNA sequence.
And so the jump between self-replicating molecules and technological societies that are self-aware and can send probes into the universe, there's such a gulf between those two things. I have for a while now just looked at that, the enormity of that, and thought, no, we're the only ones. It's so rare that if there are other examples out of the millions and millions and millions of galaxies, there are probably only a handful that have reached the adulthood of a species and full technology.
And those are probably evenly distributed, far, far away, out of our sight.
And getting farther away all the time
as
the universe expands. So there is no way that we would ever know. And I got to tell you, that's a spike through the heart of an old science fiction fan like myself. to think that the United Federation of Planets is an ideal is wonderful. And to think that it's totally impossible is just horrible. That's just horrible. But would you care to hold up that MIT volume again? Since they're your friends, you do recommend it, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, thoroughly. Like this Essential Knowledge series, just as an entire series.
You mentioned that other books in the series have also appealed to you.
Yeah, I really haven't had a good complaint. Like, so in extraterrestrials, you can only talk about radio frequencies with the search of extraterrestrial intelligence for so long before it gets boring, no matter how well the book's written. But besides like a few moments that were a little dull, how these books are put together and just the readability and the pleasure of walking through the history and kind of getting your finger on the pulse of an area of science has just been fascinating and like super valuable. I feel like a more well-rounded person because of books like this.
And you mentioned that book, in addition to radio frequencies, also talks about extremophiles.
Yeah. So like the bacteria that live around the vents and feed off of stuff other than what most forms of life feed off of. So like whether that's sulfur instead of oxygen or, extreme heat, extreme cold. There's now bacteria that eats plastics as a food source in the ocean. So the different varieties of life that are now evolving outside of our main branches.
And though some of those extremophiles effectively have no connection with the long chain of dependence on the sun,
Yeah,
right? They just don't. They just evolved without knowing there's a sun in the solar system.
exactly.
They need a planet to live on, but they don't in any way rely on solar radiation of any kind, unlike everything else we know.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that like some of the bacteria at the bottom of the ocean is feeding off of stuff that has died that did use that energy in the first place, but like the sulfur vent ones, like that's just strictly does not feed on anything based off of sunlight.
But it's extremely unlikely that anything like that could develop a civilization.
Yeah.
Right? So it could be that the artificial stuff about humans is the thing that makes us alone. All the civilizations, this technology that we're talking to each other and whatnot. But I was curious though, what in all of this, the one thing that stuck out for me was the Bart Ehrman book. I was curious to know what led you to a book about the New Testament.
So I was raised Christian, Methodist, precisely, and I was Christian up till like thoroughly Methodist Christian up till middle school. Then started, questioning some of the things that are easy to question and, straying away. Never really called myself atheist or agnostic. It just kind of faded into the background. And then as I started reading a little bit more philosophy and getting into this whole reading thing over the past 2 years, I started jokingly referring to myself as a Pascalian Christian, hedging my bets. Still very skeptical about the New Testament in its entirety. Originally, I started off reading a little bit of historical critiques of Christianity, like Zealot by Reza Aslan, and just learning about Jesus from a historical sense. And that kind of gave me a little bit of a grounding, at least a thorough interest in the person and the Jewish people around that time, if not anything for other than a historical interest. And then as I read more, I kind of got this thought simmering in the back of my brain. It's like, people talk about, like, if you're Christian, people will say, this is the best-selling book of all time. And, they have a point, but it's like very sales pitchy, right? But I'm like, they have a point. So much of our world is based around this religion that if for no other reason to understand the culture of what is behind these people, that is like a third of the people on earth. If for no other reason, I would like to understand that better. And in the process of that, learning about the issues with the Bible, the different ways it can be interpreted to reconcile those issues is just fascinating. And I can't wait to argue with my family at the next dinner.
And how did you find Bart Ehrman?
I actually liked it a lot. Yeah, so like I thought he was very fair. Like he puts his cards on the table. He says, "This is where I am, raised Christian. I'm not Christian because of these problems with free will, blah blah blah, not because of my research." And I have friends that know about this research and are still Christian. So he kind of almost takes himself out of that like conversation, which I don't think you can fully remove yourself, but at least he convinced me there wasn't any sincere motive to disprove people's faith. And he's genuinely curious about the history himself, wants to have this conversation. So as an individual, as an author, I was a little warm to him. I mean, obviously, I don't know about how he fits within the overall literary world of Christian criticism. He might be an entirely controversial person, and I might be.
I agree with you. The deal killer is if you start one of those kinds of books and you think that part of the author's goal is to destroy faith. Mm-hmm. Then why would you even keep reading? Not only because that's a totally unworthy goal, but because it prejudices the author. It means that they're going in without scholarship. They're going in with an aim in mind that is not scholarly one way or another. And he doesn't tend to do that. He tends to, like you say, lay his cards out on the table. But was that one you got from NetGalley or from a publisher?
That was actually just an audiobook from the library.
And what about, we've gone through your contentious relationship with ebooks. What about your relationship with audiobooks?
Audiobooks I love. So whenever I'm in the car going to job sites like around Virginia, I love flipping one of those on 1.5 times speed. And it's just makes the car drive go by faster. I sincerely believe a book, somebody solidifying years of research into a book form, is a much more high value activity than, say, listening to a podcast or another form of media. I do listen to music, obviously, which is not comparable, but in the car when I'm riding around, it's either audiobook or music. It's kind of come down to those two options as far as maximizing the value of my time.
I think a lot of people like audiobooks for that reason, because they're hands-free. You can fit them in to, a long, complicated meal that you're preparing,
Yeah.
where you have to pay attention to times, but you don't have to pay attention to anything else. Your brain is still free, or a long wait of some kind or other. But so if we wanted to wrap up this conversation, is there anything you want to bring up? I've just been grilling you on your latest books.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I don't really know. I think we covered most of what I wanted to talk about.
I think it's exciting that you're starting to grow relationships with publishers.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have to thank you for that. Like, honestly, I have to thank you for that, because when I started this, like, I didn't even know that was an option that was on the table. Like, I saw some huge people, like a lot of your YA people, talking about it every video. And I'm looking at their sub count, like 50,000, 80,000, 100,000, what have you. And then I'm like, okay, now granted, I'm in a smaller niche being nonfiction, but I didn't even know it was an option, like much less author interviews. And until you turned me on to that and I started thinking about it, that was not even going to be a thing for the channel, period, because I was not made aware of it and I didn't think of it myself. So this is like all because of you.
Well, it's an active part of the publishing world. I mean, if you, maybe not somebody like Bart Ehrman, but if you are, a tenured academic and you write a book on stem cell research, having a channel that reaches, hundreds and hundreds of people that see it, that's a viable thing to want to be part of that. That's the same thing that is the electronic equivalent of hand selling from booksellers in the old days. And that was abominably treated. Bookstores would get, just a box of galley copies once a month, random stuff. Just here, let's give them something. So this is much more directed. You can actually talk about, I mean, that video of yours is a perfect example. You can actually hold up a book and talk about it.
Yeah.
To an audience that has learned to trust your judgment. That is always going to be valuable. That is always going to be valuable. As long as booktubers can do that sort of thing intelligently, I think they should. I think they should try. It's a little bit dismaying to me how slow most of the publishing world is in becoming aware of the fact that Booktube exists at all. I think a lot of I think most of the publishing or publicists who know that Booktube exists think that it's mostly just gigantic YA channels. I don't think they know that.
Well, you say they think that, but that's because it is. That is what it mostly is.
Because it mostly is. If you type in Booktube, you'll get YouTube's branding of a thing called Booktube. You won't get us. You'll get the thing that the 8 gigantic channels, the YA channels that they picked to interview Michelle Obama, that they have renamed Booktube. We have the informal version. We're in copyright infringement.
I love
Every
it.
single day we're in copyright infringement. But maybe it's just as well. Can you imagine what would happen if a half dozen of the people in our little corner of Booktube interviewed Michelle Obama? The United States would have to withdraw from the UN. It wouldn't work at all.
Oh, but it'd be interesting.
It'd be interesting, yes. I'm not sure that she wouldn't love it. I bet she would. But with a thing like that, with YouTube's version of Booktube, where the YouTubers in question are just handed vetted questions, that's there's part of a publicity tour, but still much better if MIT Press can see someone like you holding up their book and talking about its strengths and weaknesses. That's so much better. Surely even that latest book video of yours, that latest roundup, surely you had people contacting you saying, well, this is going on my list. The book, book that you mentioned is going on my list.
Absolutely. I can look at the Goodreads reviews and watch the likes go up and the number, because one of these books, on Goodreads, might have 7 reviews and 15 people that have marked it to be read. And now going back to it, checking on the likes on my reviews and viewing comments and seeing that it's up to, 30, 40 want to read, like, I can't be certain that that was my doing, but you would like to think.
It's, yeah, the timing is suspect. And that is what I'm talking about. That is a real material benefit. In addition to starting conversations, that's a real material benefit. Well, let's hope it continues. Let's hope it continues. I hope you don't vanish from Booktube altogether once the wedding singing takes off.
I'm not planning on it. At least I can pump out some audiobooks going to and from. Hopefully I can get my hands on enough time to do at least one paper copy per week. We'll try.
Now you've got me curious what's coming up from MIT Press. They must have a fall catalog already.
Yeah. Well, so I have a few older books. So I'm going through a lot of the Essential Knowledge series because I really enjoy that. But I recently also got Cannabinoids and the Brain, which is like very science heavy book about how all the receptors and different terpenes and whatnot interact there. I also have a book that they've written on the anti-vax movement that's fairly new, or at least 2019, 2020, which I'm excited for. As well as I have a book coming from Princeton, which came in literally 30 seconds before we called in today. And this is the spike. So it's all about like what happens when you have that impulse or that split second decision, the 2.1 seconds between a biological signal and then you actioning on it. So sticking with the whole variety of subjects, the kind of cornucopia of nonfiction that I've kind of branded myself as.
And a terrific tone, if I may say so. It's not just the subject, it's the tone. I noticed one thing particularly, one moment in that book overview video that you just recently did. I'll leave a link to it, just in case you're all wondering why I keep mentioning it. I'll leave a link to it. I noticed at one point you were talking about a new book about ketamine.
Yeah.
And I loved the discussion, but I also loved the tone in your voice when you mentioned a dirty or a problematic drug.
Yeah.
Because that is so refreshing. This is just a thing to study. It is not a dirty subject. It's just a thing to study. It has negatives and positives, and that is so refreshing. That was so refreshing to hear. That you didn't introduce the subject of ketamine with an apology.
Yeah.
You must. I mean, you're young. You must know people who have experimented with Special K.
A few. I've been to some music festivals. I've seen some statues.
It seems like a very dirty subject, but
oh yeah,
you pointed out right away that it has all sorts of applications one way or another, and that
everything's a tool.
Totally, if we remove that kind of thinking. I love that. I got that with what was the interview you did? You did an interview with an author about hallucinogenics that was
Mescaline by Mike J.
Mm-hmm. Mescaline, that's right. That whole interview was completely free of that kind of moralism. That was great. That not only for studying the subject, but also for helping the people who have fallen into the dirty side of the subject. The only way you're going to help them is if you get rid of that moralizing and talking about the reality. Anywho. So I don't know why Frida is striking the she's imitating the lions outside the public library in New York. She ordinarily doesn't do that.
Strutting her stuff.
I think it might be a signal to me. So I'm gonna wrap this up. But we should do this again. We barely scratched the surface even of the subjects that you mentioned, much less than all the subjects you're gonna encounter between now and next time.
I'll try to read much more narrowly between this time and the next time, so we can really cut it down on that.
Don't you dare. But anyway, I'm gonna wrap this up for now. Have a good day. And I will post this later today with all the links I can think of.
Appreciate you as always.
I should link to that interview, because that interview was really good. I'll try to remember to link to all this. You can just let me know if I've forgotten something.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, have a great day.
You as well. Thank you, Steve.